Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for February 9th, 2018. We're still waiting on most of the free agents. Yu Darvish apparently is just fucking around. I don't really understand, like, sort of on a human level, what's taking so long. Because, like, functionally, 100 million is exactly the same as 25 million. Like, it doesn't matter. Like the marginal utility of $25 million when you have $100 million is so slight that what the fuck does it matter? Um, in any case, I have 3 days off in a row because of some misfortune with my friends, so I'm going to actually explore the entire filmography of one of my favorite directors. Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, I think is how you say his name. The last name is hard for me to say because it's very, very Spanish. He's part of a group of filmmakers. Guillermo del Toro and Alfonso Cuarón is the other two. They're known as the Three Amigos because they're three Mexican directors. They're friends. They're all sort of, if not officially involved, or always tangentially involved in all their sort of film. So, for example, Inarritu gave, I think it was $100,000 to Guillermo del Toro to make Pan's Labyrinth, for example. In any case, two of the three, Inarritu and Guillermo del Toro, are two of my favorite working directors today. They both have very distinctive voices, and I want to kind of set up why that's kind of impressive to me. So there's this issue in philosophy of art, or aesthetics, about what exactly counts as arts, because there's things like, to use sort of the classic example, Andy Warhol had these Brillo boxes where he basically sort of remade, by exactly the same sort of process, a Brillo box or an SOS box. It was Brillo, but if you don't know what I mean, it's SOS pads box, or the Campbell Soup label, where he put it in a museum, and somehow that makes it art. And so there's this really interesting philosophical problem why things like Warhol's Brillo boxes are art, or Deschamps' The Fountain is art. If you don't know what the fountain is, it's a urinal. And so there's that issue. And so anyway, one of the guys who wrote about this in like the 1800s, his name is Gombrich. And he came up with this notion that art is pieces which utterly express personality, that art ultimately is nature filtered through a temperament. And he tells this sort of interesting, great story about how one time when he was in art school, him and a group of friends ended up going out and painting, and he's French. He's German, and he ends up going out and painting the landscape of a whole bunch of his friends, and there was also a French group there, and if you notice that because of technique and selection of colors and sort of what people focused on, that for intergroup sort of personalities, that the more like melancholy, sad friend painted a sadder picture, or the more happy-go-lucky guy painted a sort of a brighter picture, and it's exactly the same landscape in exactly the same sort of time. And they even went further because, of course, the German, which Gombrich is German, used very sort of utilitarian, blocky, sort of austere stuff, where all the French painters painted frilly sort of stuff. And so there's this notion within art that the truly great pieces of art are those which express a temperament or a personality. Now, I actually think this is a very limited perspective. There's plenty of great art which is not very personal. And I think author theory within filmmaking is limited, because the fact of the matter is, film is, because of the economics, and then also just sort of the nature of filmmaking, where it's not like painting, where there is, or even writing a novel, there's not really one artist involved in filmmaking, you always are dealing with multiple people trying to put a movie together. And it's really hard to corral or have people supplement or sort of subvert their own sort of personalities. And so the director or the writer or the producer ends up being sort of the author of the film. And there's plenty of... and so it's hard to do to have sort of a distinctive personality. Not to the film, not to an individual film, but you can point at films and say, yes, this is definitively a Kubrick film or a Spielberg film. Most directors in most films do not have that strong of an author voice, and I think to say art only begins if there's an author voice, an auteur voice, is a little bit limiting. And so the example I like to use is actually the Marvel movies, the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. All those movies are not, they're all like Kevin Feige as the producer of a lot of them. And if you want to say the auteur is Kevin Feige, I think that's just trying to preserve a theory in fact of evidence. Is all of the Marvel movies, or most of them they're all very, very good in terms of sort of what they are, mainstream action movies building this sort of mythology. Some of them are particularly none of them are particularly deep, but something like Winter Soldier is at least conscious of sort of the political aspects of when it was released. But in any case, they're all sort of, it doesn't really matter. Like, one of the things about Marvel movies, even though there's dozens of screenwriters and a dozen or so directors, they are all sort of Marvel movies, and their Doctor Strange does not feel like it was made by a different hand than like the Avengers, and that's fine. I mean, that's sort of the thing. It's a shared universe. And I don't think films necessarily have to have sort of a distinctive auteur voice. And I think far too much in critical theory we are concerned with what is the voice of the director, or who is the author here, who is the author here. With that being said, today there's only really half dozen or so directors, Paul Thomas Anderson, in art to Guillermo del Toro, Spielberg, etc. There's only a half dozen, Peter Jackson. There's only a half dozen or so directors who have a very, very, very strong voice. And as a matter of fact, I think the three of like the half dozen or so have a strong voice, are actually these three. They're known as the Three Amigos. They're known as that because they're friends. They're all Mexican filmmakers or Mexican American filmmakers. They all were born in Mexico and they're now nationalized or whatever. Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, and Guillermo del Toro and Alfonso Cuarón are sort of the three guys, and they all are sort of, it's not the same voice, and that's sort of the point. They're all sort of very, very distinctive filmmakers, and at least for two of the three, Guillermo del Toro and Inarritu, they're actually two of my favorite, if not my favorite, working directors today. So I have been exploring, I will, for the next couple of days, I'll be exploring the Inarritu and Guillermo del Toro stuff. So let me just spend like the last couple of minutes talking about Cuarón. Cuarón, his most well-known work, because he won the Oscar for it, is Gravity. He also did Harry Potter 3, and Your Mother 2, which is a Spanish language film, and Children of Men. He's fine of the three. He's obviously, in my mind, he's the most, he's the least interesting of these directors, excuse me, or filmmakers. because he is such a he's so bad with story. And even though he sort of has really polished technical stuff, and really sort of knows what he's doing with like camera and blocking and sort of like art direction and crap, stuff like that, he's really bad with story. So like story is about creating expectations and then not fulfilling them or filling them in unusual ways or breaking sort of expectations. And let me just use Gravity for Kieran, because Gravity is like probably his best received film. It's also his worst film, because in that movie, at the very beginning of that movie, Sandra Bullock is told by George Clooney, you need to do X to survive, or X is your best chance of surviving. And then you spend the next hour waiting for her to do X, and she ends up doing X, which, whatever. There's no reversals, there's no change of fortune, etc. So he doesn't, Kieran, technically polished director. Some of his like Children of Men is sort of technically interesting, but he's very, very bad with